And it's also sometimes cognitively very taxing to imagine another person's point of view. And I think we often feel this mental fatigue. And when that happens, we often rely on what's called system one thinking, right? And we just automatically go to our responses that are sort of baked into our just automatic responses, which tends to go, our brains tend to go to our biases. So the deep work is to really spend time exploring how to move past our biases, either unconscious or real biases. So inclusive coaching can help us do that. So just recognizing that perspective taking can be challenging, and inclusive coaching can really help us get there. So how do we do that? I think when we're coaching, here are some tips that can help encourage more effective communication. We can certainly encourage folks, our clients, to slow down, right? To mitigate bias and take time to ensure that they're getting the whole picture. Don't assume you know the answer. Ask frequent and regularly to ensure that you are indeed on the same page. Confirming your understanding can help mitigate bias. And asking explicitly. The best way to understand someone better, right, is to simply ask them for their perspective, especially those that you aren't comfortable with or familiar with. Really asking and checking in can help mitigate with some of that. And by doing these things and encouraging your clients to do the same, we're more likely to mitigate the impact the biases can have on our perception and decision making. So really helping leaders uncover these biases that they may have been conditioned to educate or believe. Our questions can help them go more deeply. But I think we have to be really conscious about taking the perspective to seek those that we don't understand and setting time aside for really thoughtful perspective taking. So I'm sure many of you are familiar with Brene Brown and some of the questions that she's got included in her Dare to Lead. And I think as a coach, I use many tools. This is just one of them. I think these particular questions, although they're very familiar, you've seen them many times in your coaching practice, I'd actually encourage you to pause and think about when you're doing perspective taking and using it in your coaching practice. Questions are very powerful that begin with "help me understand," or "the story I make up about this." They can be really powerful tools that help people encourage perspective taking and help people to go beyond their own lived experiences. Again, these are very basic, but they really are very powerful and help you, especially in equity and diversity and inclusion work. But there are more. There are ways to go beyond. So inclusion coaching, which is something that I've been working on for a while, really can help you go further beyond some of those questions. So examples of those kinds of questions would be, what truth would you like to share? Or how does inclusivity honor your values? I like this particular one. What story do you tell yourself about people whose culture differs from yours? Or how can we affirm people's true identities beyond their job descriptions? Or how can you create opportunities for marginalized groups to thrive? Or what can you reimagine about your business to create a more versatile experience that fits the needs of all your employees? I think these questions are really helpful and can go deeper than kind of some of the original surface level ones that we mentioned earlier. There's a great book. It's called Action Guide for Diversity Beyond Lip Service, and I've included it in the references. And it really can help you begin to change attitudes and go deeper. Yes, you can get a copy of the presentation, and I've just really briefly gone through some of the ideas around perspective taking. And I do think as a coach, encouraging leaders to talk about their own lived experience is really, really valuable and important. And I think sometimes we shy away from it, but it's actually important to remember that the work is so relational that it's really important and helpful. And actively engaging in perspective taking really does help deepen our work around empathy, and helping people think about how to do more inclusive coaching is also something I'm interested in, and I think might even be a separate conversation, but I just wanted to include some of the questions that you can begin to ask to start that work. And I do have references that are here, and I can certainly send more to folks. But I really wanted us to have time to go into the bulk of the presentation, which still relates to what we're talking about, but that is with Jan. So I'm going to turn the time over to Jan. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, and it's a great segue into what we're going to talk about next. Welcome, everyone. It's an interesting topic to think about. How do you help leaders in particular to be able to kind of unlock and examine the things that might be difficult, you know, to look at, and also to really get the alignment between these multiple intelligences. I just want to, and if I'm looking down a little bit, it's because I'm looking at my notes. I need the notes occasionally to keep me on track, because this is such a huge subject. I could talk about it for hours and hours. Like we said, Anjali and I are going to do a demo at the end of this to show you a little bit of how the foundational sequencing of the multiple brain integration techniques work. I notice a lot of you, and have noticed recently that more and more coaches have experiences in the neuroscience. And I have to say that it's what really got my attention, and is why I went on beyond the PCC to really do the work with the multiple brain intelligences. And it's not just the work of any one person. There's lots and lots of work being out there. What I want to focus on today is the work of Grant Susla and Marvin Orca, and also the work of Dr. Judith Glaser, who was really instigator of all the work around conversational intelligences, who unfortunately passed last year from cancer, and we lost her wisdom. But let me just come back just for a moment about myself. The other thing I want to let you know is, in addition to the work that I do with the multiple intelligences, I think a lot of what we've all struggled with through COVID around the world, it's an issue of just finding that resiliency and how we've had to tap into that. I teach a 60-hour accredited program with ICF on resiliency building. So let's move on to the next one. Now I'm going to put you right to work. I want you to just sit up straight wherever you are. And I'm going to ask you to focus and take 6 deep breaths. As you're doing that, I really want you to think about just kind of having a conversation where you invite your brain, your heart, and your gut to enter into this journey with you. So just 6 quiet, deep breaths with an intention of getting the brain, heart, and gut engaged. So as you're sitting in your quiet space, I want you to go back and think about a time that you were gutsy and courageous. I don't know when that was in your life, but just put yourself back there, try to relive it. You were gutsy and you were courageous. And now what I'd like you to do is, we're going to think about a moment where you were filled with love and with kindness. And again, I'm asking you to go back and to relive that moment. Now I want you to tap in and remember a time when you were really clear-headed and you were logical and able to make a good decision. And I'm intentionally asking you some reflective questions so that you start thinking about what it is, what brain was I using in this decision? So think back to a time where you made a decision that was full of multiple complex factors, and that decision was a good one. What did you rely on? Which brain did you maybe rely on most in order to make that good decision? And you can also kind of contrast that experience with one that didn't go so well. Yeah, let's just move on to the next slide. So again, what we're talking about today is the mBraining work, and certainly I could send resources if anybody is interested in learning more about it. It was the work of, again, Grant Susla, also recently deceased. But what he and Marvin did was they did a huge meta study that looked at kind of the connections between heart, the head, and the gut. And what they found in their study was that there was some correlation between like heart and the head, or heart and the gut, but not really a good correlation between all three. So what we're going to look at is how do you use these techniques, and why does it matter, you know, for leaders and their role in developing their own self-awareness. In the brain, you know, one of the things that, you know, if anybody asks me, this is what I always tell them, I say, what's the most important thing I can do for my career? And I'm like, read the brain research, because it changes constantly. And, you know, we can go in and look at the brain now through the MRIs, functional MRIs, through CAT scans. And, you know, all of that gives us such wealth of good information, maybe new information or changing information. And the one thing we want to remember is that the brain is always going to be giving us new information. So stay tuned. Let's go to the next slide and look at really how neuroscience kind of meets this ancient wisdom. And that's what a lot of the work that's being done now that, again, we can tap into the brain. So science is finally getting, you know, beginning to really get involved with the process of meditation, of focusing on mindfulness, compassion, loving kindness. All of that changes both the behavior and the mood. In our heart brain, we have about 40 to 120,000 neurons. We can grow new neurons, make new neural connections, not just in the brain. We know we can do that. Woo-hoo, that's great news. We can also do it in the heart. We can also do it in the gut. The gut brain is probably the size of a cat brain. Let's go back to looking at ancient wisdom, because, you know, if you look at the jewels that were brought by the, you know, Taoism, is the living in harmony. And the main tenets there are about love, moderation, humility, and connections. And that's about having our body in a coherent space. For those of some of you who are on this call may be aware of heart math, but if you're interested in that, you can Google heart math, and there are ways in which you can get, you know, tap into the heart variability, and it helps you to breathe into learning how to breathe into your body's coherence. Let's go on to the next one. So what? You know, it's my big question is, so what? So let's have fun for a moment. Let's just think about these. We're going to work with the brain, heart, and gut in this session. When you think about the heart, and the gut and the heart feeds the brain, it isn't the other way around. When you think about the heart, what kind of expressions come up for you? And I'll give you an example just to jumpstart this. Think about, you know, Carrie Fisher passed away, and then her mother, Debbie Reynolds, died like a day or two later. What do people say about her heart? Yeah, it broke. You heard a lot of that. So what's another common expression of the heart? Heavy-hearted, great. Yeah, aching heart, big heart, heartache, warm heart. Okay. let's think about moving from the heart up to the head brain. When you think of the head brain, what kind of expressions come up for you that we hear and use frequently? And again, let me trigger your thought there. Think about a teenager. And what is a common phrase we use with them? A common expression. Hot-headed, good. Headstrong. Has anybody ever said to a teenager, use your head? You know, I need to wrap my head around it. So we use these expressions a lot, and we don't necessarily, know how they're all really connected. And then let's go back, scatterbrained. Let's go back to your gut. We're moving from the head down to the gut. What are some common expressions we use in the gut? Gut feeling, great. Bad gut feeling, yeah. Gut punch, I love that. Yeah. Trust your gut. Yeah, it's the seat of your intuition. Trust my gut. Great. So, as Anjali pointed out in her presentation and talking about inclusive coaching, really she introduced the need for us to be more aware and leaders to be more aware of what happens in our autonomic nervous system, because that's really what we're talking about. As we go there, we have these automatic triggers. And if you think about it, how many times we reacted to a trigger and then gone back to someone and said, I'm sorry. And a lot of that is because we've acted out of what we've already got in our memory and just comes flying out of us. So let's move to the next slide, Anjali. Yeah, we don't just have one brain. That's the so what. So in our highest expression, what we're going to be working with here is looking at, the creativity is what comes from our cephalic brain. Our cephalic brain is our head brain. And this is where we're talking about you can see the cognition. It's how we make meaning of things. It's the interpretation of words. When we're talking about compassion, and this is a big part, I'm sure a lot of you do this in coaching yourselves, is a big part of people is helping them to look at the values, because our values are not in our head, our values are in our heart. And a lot of the times the clients I've worked with or in teaching others, we really find that there's many people who haven't even thought about how that misalignment may be happening for them, and how do they get back in alignment, because that's where it is. It's in the heart. Our gut brain, and certainly, I could go on, like I said, for hours about this. We know the number of incidences around Crohn's disease and IBS and other kinds of digestive problems. That's because our enteric brain is also our mobilization. It's our identity. It's you versus you, and so it's really, its work is about self-preservation. And the reason I love this subject matter so much is that we really have a lot of the gut has come with us through our life. I've been around the sun more times than I care to think. But what's happened is I've had a life of experience. And if I haven't included my gut is reacting what it learned maybe 50, 55 years ago. So think about yourself, when we can get to all these higher expressions of that creativity and compassion and courage and integrate them through balanced coherence, that's the ultimate wisdom, I guess. So think about yourself. Do you have an over-reliance on any one brain? I think that you heard in my, when I was being introduced, that some of my work, a lot of my work has actually been working with judges, and I teach them how to use coaching skills, especially with newer judges coming on. And we work with this because judges and many professionals are really, what they value is what's up here, this cognition. And what we want to do is to help them to be able to kind of unlock again, maybe the heart or the gut, so that we get better decision making as a result of that. I once asked a judge, we were talking about vulnerability, which is directly correlated back to the work of Brene Brown and her Dare to Lead and her strong statement that you have to be willing to muck around and be vulnerable in order to really sustain change in yourself, in your organizations, and in your communities. I think one of my favorite sayings is that, change does not happen without discomfort. And what you find in working with the kind of questions that Anjali had about inclusiveness, conversations at a very deep level, is that, we are intentionally trying to create a little bit of that discomfort safely. Okay, let's go on to the next one and just kind of show a quick diagram of the autonomic nervous system. And what we're really talking about here is this one down here. And that's where when people are out of their balanced coherence, they are either activating the sympathetic nervous system or the parasympathetic nervous system. So an example of that, I'll just give you a real quick one because again, in the mBraining, they've developed core competencies that look at the heart, brain, and gut competencies separately and say, okay, here's balance, here's where it's gone off into the sympathetic or the parasympathetic. So if you think about a person who is at peace and able to forgive, and that is a balanced, coherent place, the opposite of that is when someone, and we've seen this, when someone moves over to the sympathetic part of their brain, they're activating probably anger, and that may be the behavior or the emotion that gets expressed. Likewise, in the parasympathetic, person who's moved away from that balanced place of peace and forgiveness can be demonstrating emotional numbness. Okay, let's go on to the next one. So I had to do a little balanced breathing. And, if you can put up the next couple of bullets, Anjali, just go ahead and put them all up. Breathing is primal. We all have to do it. There's a great bridge between the mind and the body and getting in touch with all of that, all of who we are, the essence of who we are. It's a great gateway between what we're conscious and focused on and the unconscious. And then I think there's one more. Yeah. It has a direct and intimate connection to emotional states and moods. So I'm going to give you two things here. One is, if you haven't read the book, I'm going to recommend a book. It's called Breath, The New Science of a Lost Art. The author is James Nestor, Nestor. And, when we're working with our balanced breathing, we're also tapping into ways in which we can build our resilience. And we have all had our resilience tested through COVID. How many of you have a daily practice of working with the breath in whatever way you do it? Yoga, meditation, I hope you have that. It doesn't have to be a 2-hour session or a 20-minute meditation. It can be 2 minutes of just intentional focused breathing, and the power of what can come from that is pretty phenomenal. In my own life, I do a daily practice of not just the breathing, but also gratitude, and I find 3 things that I'm grateful for every single day that I am consciously attached to those words, those meanings, those experiences. Okay, so let's go on to the next. And here's where we are. Again, I'm back to so what, and here's the question for you. Go ahead and hit the next one, Anjali. The question is, what are some of the implications of this emerging science as it relates to you as a coach? Just think about this, the more we know, the more we can work with this. I was really struck on some of the research that I read fairly recently that self-awareness and self-reflection is now the #1 sought after trait in leaders today. This is what they're looking for in hiring CEOs and leaders, is their ability to do and be connected to themselves fully. And you certainly need that when you look at what we're trying to do moving forward, which is to kind of bring our communities back together in whatever way we can. But it's going to be different from what it was before. So that's really it for me. I have a lot of resources and I'm happy to share them. If you want to get in touch with me on email anytime, we can talk more about that. Oh yeah, what about food? Yeah, that's exactly right. It's interesting because I talk to a lot of, work with executives and with judges in particular, and I will say to them that I'm not just going to talk to your head. I treat the whole person. And, I'm not a life coach, but I don't exclude looking at the way that we live, the choices we make, the foods that we put in our body, the habits. We talk about that because that is the essence of who we are. So Anjali and I are going to go into a little demo for you and hope maybe this will illustrate it a little more. And I see that you said I'd love to have some more resources, and I will find a way to get those to you, and I'm happy to put together a list of some of the things that I would recommend that would give you some additional information. Thank you, Lisa. Adequate rest is incredibly important. How many of you get more than 8 hours of sleep, 7 to 8, more than 7 hours of sleep a night? Intentional. Not this guy, not this guy. You need the rest. Our brain assimilates information and experiences through the night. And it is so important to get good rest and get sleep so that we can get up. So when I'm up, after I do sleep maybe 8 or 9 hours, I'm fully present when I'm awake. But I work at getting an adequate amount of sleep. And I've done that my entire life. It isn't just in, partial retirement, if you will. So are you ready for the demo? I'll give you an example of how I've used this work in my own coaching practice. And it's not something you just start out and say, okay, now we're just going to go into this, coaching where I'm going to ask you to talk to your heart and to your gut. There's prep work that happens, and you also, as a coach, when you're listening deeply, then you are able to find those opportunities where you can take someone where. And I recently did that with a woman who's a director in a high position at a huge pharmaceutical company. And what was happening was she was feeling she was being marginalized. And she's a brilliant individual, just knows her work so well. But what's getting in the way was really not her intelligence, because that's valued there. It was the savvy that she needed to work inside this political, bureaucratic kind of organization. So I took her back to talking more about her childhood, just to get a sense of who she was, because that's really, once we got into that, we realized that her reactions and what triggered for her is that sense of survival, not sense of control and thriving. So that gave us a new direction and new activities for her to pay attention to see if we can kind of turn this experience around for her. So yes, this is really powerful stuff. It's something I feel incredible passion for because I have used it and I have seen it. And I have also seen the impact it has when leaders get better at their own self-awareness, because when they unlock compassion, that's what we need today. And so I'm going to leave you with my favorite, and then we'll go into some Q&As, but I'm going to leave you my favorite leadership quote. I read it and think about it every day, because the more power we have, or the more power that we are perceived to have by others, the nicer we can afford to be. And let me just say that one more time. The power we have, or the power that others perceive we have, the nicer we can afford to be. So thank you so much. We'll open it up to some Q&As. I want to thank Anjali for her participation and her willingness to go deep.